Hello, and welcome to the BullCast podcast. I'm Katie Pickler, and with me is Court Winsett.
Hello.
Cameron Spann.
Hello.
And we're going to have a guest today. Are y'all excited?
It has been a while since we've had a guest.
It has been, but we're ready to bring a guest back. We've got a doctor in the house.
Doctor in the house.
And it's not Doogie Howsen.
There's some doctors
Oh, I would
in this
love
house.
Doogie in the house. That'd be great.
Oh, yeah, that would be.
Yeah, but we've got Dr. Lloyd Finks.
With
ZüpMed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into his episode, we're just do a real rapid fire, quick little pop culture list for you. This is going to be some of the top medical TV shows and movies. So, real rapid fire. Let's go. Grey's Anatomy.
Okay. House MD.
Oh, yes, I love Dr. House.
The Good Doctor.
Scrubs.
Classic. But even more classic is ER.
Man, I grew up on that one.
Me too.
Yeah.
Noah Wiley. Patch Adams with Robin Williams.
Such a good one.
Contagion.
Contagion.
That got dark.
And then
Once I'm like, look at this. I'm like, oh, these like Patch Adams. Patch Adams.
My Sister's Keeper, which I
don't know that one.
My FYP has been getting loaded with clips from My Sister's Keeper lately.
Yeah.
It's weird. And then, of course, we do have another sort of medical-related movie that's coming out here soon, or maybe out now, with Andrew Garfield called We Live in Time. And I think one of them, it's with Florence Pugh, and I love her.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of him. So
Well, and Dr. Odyssey's on right now. It's my new love. Joshua Jackson. Woo, he
Yeah.
looks great.
that's done by somebody.
Ryan Murphy.
Yeah, okay,
Which
it's
everyone keeps saying, like, this is not very Ryan Murphy. Like, is the shoe about to drop? Like, is this not real? But he is a doctor who was in the midst of COVID stuff. I'm not going to mess up what the storyline is, but he now works on a luxury cruise line as the doctor. And so very interesting. Each episode is a different theme for the week on the cruise.
Isn't it Pacey from Dawson's Creek?
Yeah, Joshua Jackson.
I knew that name rang a bell.
I love me some Dawson's Creek. I'm not going to lie.
And
Mighty Ducks. Hello.
Okay. So
And then the new show he just did, Fatal Attraction.
yeah. I mean, so he's been in a lot lately. But I like those WB/CW shows. And he was Pacey in Dawson's Creek. As a matter of fact, I was watching that the other night. Weird. Okay. I guess that's our list. So we got places to go and people to talk to. So let's get on with it.
So we have a wonderful guest with us, as we talked about at the beginning of the episode, and we have Lloyd with us. So Lloyd, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and kind of what you do.
Oh, Katie, where shall we begin?
At the beginning.
At the beginning. Well, I'm not sure we want to go back that far. So, thank you. First of all, it's a thrill to be here. I got to tell you, I'm a fan of your podcasts, and I'm certainly a fan of what you guys do in the financial world.
Thank you.
So it's a thrill to be here. ZüpMed, and originally Zup.
Okay.
So we should probably we should begin with the pronunciation of
yes.
that. We're going to say book, look, cook, Zup.
I was
Okay.
wondering because I was calling it Zoop.
Yes, of course you were.
It's a Zup.
Yeah. And half of my staff, after working with us for several years, calls it Zoop. I'm comfortable with that. It's just weird enough that it works for us. But it's Zup, and Zup is Yiddish for soup.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so my favorite aunt of all time was a very beautiful woman from New York City, redheaded, just glamorous as she could be, looked like she just walked out of the 40s. And she was a dietitian at Columbia Hospital, and at a time when women didn't have those kind of positions. She moved to Miami Beach when I lived in South Florida, and we got to know each other, and she would wag this finger at me. She goes, "Zup, it's the greatest medicine on earth." And that's where our name came from.
Cool.
So Zup, we are a general medical clinic, very high touch, located in one of the premier shopping centers here in Memphis. Zup is the culmination of what my wife, who is a pharmacist, a doctor of pharmacy, and I found and continue to find wrong with American healthcare. And so what we try to do is identify things that don't work well in healthcare and try to address that. For example, we can start with insurance. It's no secret that insurance is problematic. There are very few families who can afford health insurance at today's prices, and then one finds that it's very not just expensive, but it doesn't cover what it needs to cover, right? A worse problem, we believe, is the lack of transparency. If you don't know what you're going to pay before you get there, then you're very hesitant to go there. And as a result, people don't like going to the doctor because it's a dice throw, right? And so even if you have a copay of $25 to go to an urgent care, it is very likely that 3 months down the road, you're going to get a bill from your x-ray, or your lab tests, and all of a sudden you owe several $100s. And for the vast majority of Americans, several $100s is real money. So we begin by knowing that you have to have financial transparency. We don't take insurance. We also believe that going to the doctor should not be a rushed or hurried experience. That in order to provide good medical care, you have to be able to communicate, and you have to have the time to do that. So from the start, from the way we answer the telephones to the way we greet you when you arrive, you'll notice we don't have a waiting room because we don't wait. Somebody will stand up and greet you and say, "Oh, Ms. Pickler, so nice to see you. Sorry you're not feeling well. Your room is ready." Boom.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Your room is ready. Staff has just a couple of minutes to get in there and welcome you and get some vital signs and get a little bit of your story, after which you'll see a provider, a nurse practitioner, or a physician, and they're going to take as much time as they need to go ahead and you need to go ahead and start to identify the problem. We don't have traditional exam tables in the majority of the rooms. We have zero-gravity recliners. They're heated. They have massage. The room is pleasantly lit but not glaring. We have our own lab. We have our own x-ray. And when it's time for you to check out, we have a dispensary with about 100 different medications so that you don't have to stand in line at your local drugstore only to be told that your insurance won't cover that. We also have a full line of vitamins and supplements and over-the-counter drugs, because everybody needs their Tylenol or their ibuprofen or whatever else to feel better. And we provide a broad range of services, both urgent care. Primary care includes things like hormone management. We have IV hydration services. We operate, since the evolution of the GLP-1s, we operate...
I didn't know what that meant.
Oh, I'm sorry.
GLP-1?
Yeah, okay, if we're going to have these conversations, you're going to have to do some homework.
Come on.
Yeah.
Take a guess, Cordy, what GLP-1 is.
No idea.
He's just playing up to us right now. So the GLP-1s are probably, second to Viagra and other erectile dysfunction drugs, is the most evolutionary, socially changing medications that have ever been introduced. Well, I guess we have to put antibiotics at the top of the list. But GLP-1s are a hormone synthesized that works in a number of different ways, but most importantly controls appetite, slows the gastric passage. Wait, I'm not done. And actually crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is actually harder to say than it sounds, and crosses the blood-brain barrier and actually decreases your hunger and increases your satiety. So in easy terms, weight loss.
Yeah, this is the stuff that we're seeing all over the place right now.
Sure, and I don't know, can we say Ozempic?
Yeah.
You can say brand names. We'll go OV.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And
they're not paying us anything to say that.
No.
But we can say it.
But we should have maybe talked to them before we said it. So yeah, that's that. And what we do, we approach it a little bit differently. I mean, these things are available, as you guys well know, everywhere online. I mean, through every publication you read. We insist on our patients following with us. We monitor markers such as blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, lipids. What we do is we work very carefully with you to keep you within the boundaries of safety and also success, because sometimes you have to change things up, change some dosing. And then the big question, of course, is what do you do afterwards? So we can talk about that, but that's not the subject of our talk today.
I have never been to a doctor's office where I do not wait at least 30 minutes.
Me either.
Yeah.
So that sets you apart.
Yeah. Well, we're very proud of that.
Yeah.
As
you should be.
We shouldn't be, actually, because it's what you should expect.
Right.
Right? I mean, let's be honest. If I walk in here and I want to visit one of the Pickler folks and we have a 2:30 appointment, I have an expectation that's somewhere near 2:30. Or at the very least, somebody's going to walk out and just say, I am so sorry. He is tied up on this call. She'll be out with you in just a moment. But we don't do that in healthcare. We do a lot of very silly things. We make appointments 3 months in advance, and we walk up to the front desk and they say, and what are you here for today? I had nothing else to do. I thought I would watch the home improvement shows on your TV and look at 6-year-old magazines. I mean, we just do a lot of dumb things in medicine. And Shannon and I have a a lot of fun addressing those and trying to figure out how to beat it. And we've been working on it for about 4.5 years. We opened up the day before the mayor shut down the city for COVID, which was a brilliant business move. Sat out there looking at an empty parking lot and thinking, well, this is smart.
Yeah. I mean, the American people have been conditioned to wait.
Yeah,
and you're almost like waking them up with this new revolutionary idea of no wait time. And it's silly to talk about that.
But it's, I mean, I've said that when I've had a doctor's appointment just to go and give blood, which I know once I get back there, it's super fast, but I'll be like, guys, I got to build in an hour and a half just to be sitting there waiting to get called back. And then you're done. Or a lot of times you go to a doctor and you're like, I've waited 3 times the amount of time the doctor actually spent with me.
Yeah.
And that's just normal.
Yeah, I would love to sit and do a whole show on how we think about this. But one of the things that you just said is you wait on the doctor. And traditional healthcare practices are set up, they are doctor-centric, right? The doctor is at the middle of the pie, and everybody else rotates around her or him, and including the patient. Right? That's not the way this is supposed to work. It is supposed to work that the patient is in the middle, and everybody else should be supporting that patient and the reason for their visit. And if you think about it like that, and look, all we are is 100 years before or behind the times, because we being the healthcare industry, because look at hotels, look at restaurants, look at Disney World.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been thinking about this for a long time and figured out that if you're willing to part with money to go ahead and experience a meal or a weekend stay, then by goodness, we better go ahead and do it well. And that's what we need to start doing in healthcare.
Yeah. So when you were talking about this, I'm just thinking, wow, this sounds wonderful. No wait, you're being taken care of. I'm just picturing as you're talking about this, and I haven't even seen your location, that it's going to feel different. It's not going to feel like that sterile environment. It's going to feel much more like you care about the patients. So then instantly what goes in my mind is, how much is this going to cost me?
Yeah, sure. And I think, and it should. First of all, I have to address the sterile environment, all right, because I know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
No, you were nodding.
I know where you're going. Right. No, I know what you're talking about. The first thing that's going to greet you in our clinic is a German Shepherd.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. We are dog friendly. Our Shepherd's been with us. This particular dog's been with us since she was 9 weeks old, and she likes nothing more than somebody to toss a tennis ball to her. Which from the liability standpoint, we spend an awful lot of time picking up dog toys. I'll tell you that. But she is not only trained, but she's just natural to go into a patient's room if that's what you want. She'll sit by you while your blood is being drawn, and it's just really fun. And people bring their own dogs. Oh. And so, it's not unusual for us to have a mutt in the room with the patient. And there is absolutely 100% zero reason why that should not be. We know that dogs lower your blood pressure. It lowers your anxiety.
I was thinking the white coat syndrome, how people talk about their blood pressure and they're like, is this your normal? It's like, no, I have white coat syndrome, where it's just stressed and you're already nervous. So that'd be so cool if there's a dog kind of comfort. And so your attention is there and it's like, oh, what's going on? Okay, this is what's happening.
Yeah. The dog is the antidote to the white coat syndrome.
Yeah.
Again, something else that's kind of broken in healthcare. But going back to that, the entire experience should be very relaxed. Does it cost? So here's the question, right? So there's 2 ways to come to see us. One is what we call on demand.
Okay.
And that is you wake up, your head's stuffy, you maybe have a fever, your tummy's upset or something like that. And you go, man, I'm not going to get through the day without seeing somebody and doing something about this. So that's our urgent care side. You don't need to be a member. We are very happy to try to fit you in. And that's a flat rate of $179 for a visit. Can it cost more? Yes, it can. For example, if we had to do an X-ray or an EKG, tracing of your heart, something like that, it is. But we're going to discuss that with you before. And you're going to know exactly when you walk out how much that costs.
This is unheard of.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
As he's saying, it shouldn't be. But you're right. It's one of those that you're in that moment and the doctor's like, oh, we got to run all these tests. And you're like, okay. But in the back of your mind, you're going, well, how much is this going to cost me? So that's great that it's up front. You can prepare of this is how much it's going to be.
It is. And the alternative to that is, let's say that you have what in general terms is a chronic disease condition, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. These are things that need managing over time and consistently. You don't cure high blood pressure. You don't cure diabetes. You treat it. So at that point, we recommend that you become a member.
Okay.
And membership is age-based. It's on an age-based rate and goes roughly from $45 up to $125 a month for $125 for 65 and older. That allows you to have unlimited visits with no visit fee. So the $179 is waived. So if, for example, we're really working on your blood pressure and every couple of weeks we're having you in there, we're measuring your blood pressure, and we do things a certain way, and it might take a few minutes to get it right, and we look and say, man, we got to adjust your medicine, come back in 2 more weeks, let's take another look at this. Or we're managing weight, and every single week you're getting an injection of your GLP-1. Every week you're getting an injection. That's where it really pays to become a member.
Yeah.
And we have a brisk membership. We had to put it on hold, and we're in the process of expanding and doubling our floor space right now. So we're going to open up some more membership here.
Wow.
So
You had talked about the lighting and the overall vibes of the building when you come in. As the in-house branding guy, I've got to ask, what was that process like? How thoughtful were you in picking out the light bulbs, the paint colors, the overall aesthetic of your building?
I would say very thoughtful, and we pinged a lot of different people in different industries looking for the right answers. And we're still fine-tuning it, for this new expansion. We're getting to have fun all over again. The design was done by a Memphis architect here in town. You might be familiar with his work. He converted the Pyramid to the Bass Pro Shops.
Okay.
He did the Raleigh Springs Library. He did the University of Memphis football locker rooms. He's incredibly creative team. And we started off with some conversations that began in the same tone. What makes you crazy about going to your doctor's office? One of the things we got was that I hear everything in the room next door. I hear the screams and the moans.
Yeah.
And,
You know what's going on with them.
Yeah, I don't want to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of thought and a lot of money into soundproofing the rooms.
Okay.
They're not cocoons. They're not like a studio, but they have a lot of cool tricks that really muffle the sound. And the lighting is completely adjustable. We drew the line at colorful LEDs flashing on and off,
Sure.
But a lot of it goes into it, and we're still working on it.
Well, so I got a couple of questions. Number one, you said you started right at COVID, essentially, with everything shutting down. Obviously, you were able to get past that, and you now are talking about expanding. So the business is being very successful. But I mean, that's another thing is I think switching from a consumer side to a business side, then you sound like you've got great staff if you're able to have somebody come in, be with the patient at all times. How has that been where you were trying to get through the COVID periods and then into now you are so successful?
Well, Shannon calls the COVID period, as you refer to it, as the greatest open house we could have never afforded. We ran just short of 28,000 people through our clinic operations in the year and a half of COVID. When you're forced, we had mortgaged both our homes to do this. And when we were looking at that empty parking lot, we were staring down the face of disaster right there. What you have to do in business is to remain flexible, right? And so COVID was here. It wasn't going away. And you'll recall the times where you had to sit in your car in line for hours. There were people waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 hours for a COVID test and not getting results sometimes for a day, 2 days, 3 days, sometimes, longer than that. We were the first private medical clinic to offer in-clinic COVID testing. Remember, the vast majority of medical practitioners had closed at that point because nobody knew what this was. We were dumb and stayed open, and we started doing COVID tests. We immediately reached out to some colleagues, built a relationship with a lab. We're the only game in town offering same-day COVID results. So that began to grow the business. Remind me to tell you the price we paid for that later on. But at this point, now we're becoming COVID repository of information. We also went ahead and looked at something that, because we had this relationship with a lab, the COVID tests were positive or negative, except they weren't. What it turned out is that they yielded an objective result that determined which side of the result, or you determined which side of the result that fell on, whether or not they were positive or negative. If you had access to that number, you could actually see how positive positive or how negative you were with COVID. So if you were in the peak of your disease and you were sick as a dog, maybe not even felt that bad, but your numbers were indicative of a very high viral load, we would say to you, look, it's going to be a few days before you clear this. But let's say you had to fly to Amsterdam for a meeting. And on Tuesday, 2 days from now, we were able to look at it and say, you know what? You're on the tail end of this thing. Let's go ahead and wait another 24 hours. Let's retest. By the way, we can get the results same day. I think you might be able to pull this trip off. And so we developed a reputation. And about that same time, the airport came to us and said, would you guys be willing to open a testing center in the airport? And for another year, a little over, about a year and a half, we got to operate in the airport.
Wow.
I learned so much about airport business that I never want to revisit again. But they were wonderful hosts. And so we were able to do that until COVID pretty much cleared.
Wow.
Now it's become what everybody, expected it to be. It's kind of endemic.
But I mean, I had never heard about how you could see how positive or how, that is a game changer, because it was just you kept testing, and it would have been great to know, oh, you're on the tail end, or oh no, we'll see you in a week.
Yeah. And a lot of people, we learned just like, I don't know, there's the organism that causes strep throat. You can be colonized with it, and you can sometimes hang on to that positive test, if you will. In the case of strep, it often never goes away. It'll always test positive. But in the case of COVID, sometimes you were positive for 30, 60 days.
Yeah. I'm determined if somebody says strep throat, I get it.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm sorry to do that to you.
I'll call on you and say, okay, it happened.
So anyway.
For the most part, with any infectious disease, are you most contagious at the peak of your symptoms, or before you even notice, are you most contagious?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the disease. It's because what you have to think about is peak of symptoms and what you're actually seeing there. For example, you can be pretty dog sick from an immune response that's busy mopping up that virus, but it's actually the immune response that you're sick from. And so it's entirely possible that you're not nearly as infectious just when you are feeling the worst. Very often that infectivity happens earlier in the disease. So it depends on the disease.
So my late time show that I've been binge watching right now is Royal Pains, which he's a concierge doctor in the Hamptons. And I've always that's brilliant. You've got a doctor on call for whatever happens. So when you were talking about this membership, so if I became a member and it was for blood pressure or whatever, something like that, would then with that membership, obviously I'm seeing you on a regular basis for blood pressure, but then if I got strep throat or had something like that, is that kind of built into the membership?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you become ill, we take care of you.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And we do a lot of, here's another fun thing that we do. Membership or not, when you come to see us, we have the feel good or feel better guarantee. And what that means is, look, you came in for your strep throat kitty. 5 days later, you're still feeling lousy. You're still feverish. We don't charge you again. Once we tap you on the shoulder and say, we got you, we're going to stick with you until we get an answer for this.
That's amazing, because a lot of times it could be it turns into something else or things like that.
You're absolutely correct. And look, let's be honest about this. We're not always right. No doctors can be. We're not always right. And we may call it strep throat, but it may very well be a viral infection. Just because you tested positive for strep, or we thought it was strep and we treated you with an antibiotic, maybe it's not. And so why not go ahead and know that you can come right back in and, again, not have to worry about how much this is going to cost.
Yeah, I think that's why most people that I talk to, they, as a female, they may have their OBGYN. If they have some kind of chronic, they may have an endocrinologist, things like that. But very few people seem to have a GP. They have their urgent care that they'll go to when there's something wrong. But you're right. It's like I may come in for strep throat, and then a week later I'm not feeling great. Go back to that same urgent care. That same doctor's not going to be there. It's going to be kind of explaining it all again. So that's where... and obviously you've probably seen that, where a lot of people are shying away from having one kind of doctor that can kind of help with everything.
Well, I think you're also describing an urban versus rural situation, right? There's some wonderful, wonderful numbers out there about how the more cardiologists you have in a particular given geographic area, the more catheterizations, caths you do. And is it because there's more heart disease? No. It's because you have more cardiologists. I think this tendency to, you have diabetes, you need to see an endocrinologist. diseases. A well-trained internist is perfectly capable of handling diabetes. This is game by the numbers and by the relationship. And so, the idea of everybody having to have specialists, that's a construct of living in a densely populated urban area with lots of doctors.
Yeah, because we've talked about that financially, of how financial and time of it's like, well, I've got to go to my OBGYN for this, and I got to go to my endocrinologist for this, and then I got to go to this doctor, and making sure all of them are talking together, and then you're spending all this time, you, the patient, are bouncing between all of them.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem. And that is not to say that you do not need expert management, but I was trained that you call an expert when A, you don't know the answer, or B, they can do something that you can't. The rest of it should fall to a generalist. But again, generalists are becoming more difficult to find.
Because we are a podcast about personal finance, and because you're a doctor, I have an obligatory question I have to ask.
My net worth?
That's BullCast after hours. How does stress, particularly financial stress, affect a person's physical and mental health?
Oh, my God. Thank you for putting me on the Now, interestingly enough, we were talking on the way over here about this very question, and not necessarily financial stress, but stress in general. So I'm going to have to bore you with a little bit of background.
Please.
Okay? So you're going to like this because there's a lot of different things going on here. To begin with, in the study of aging, if you're looking for models of aging, all right, number one, we know that currently there's really only one way to extend life, and that is with calorie deprivation. Eating fewer calories than your body actually needs. Your body seems to adapt to that, maybe by slowing down a little bit. Nobody is completely quite sure, but we do know that the only thing that's ever been shown to make you live longer is to eat less than you think you need, or your body apparently needs. So that's an important. Now let's talk about how to kill yourself. In the models of aging in the animal world, there are two classic models. One, I was taught 34 years ago, the white-footed deer mouse, which has now been included. Most of the deer mice species are now in this group. And the other one is the Pacific sockeye salmon, and that includes most of the salmon again now. White-footed deer mouse, Pacific sockeye salmon were the ones that were studied. So let's do Mr. Salmon first. Okay, so salmon goes ahead, is hatched at the very top of the rivers where he eats what's available up there and then begins to go downriver until he enters salt water, at which point he lives his life in that salt water until it's time to reproduce. He turns around, does a 180, heads back to the exact same river, and not only the exact same river, same tributary and the same spot where he was spawned, and reproduces, whereupon he dies. Oh, it's really sad. Okay? It's really sad. You look a little bit closer, and you find that this animal, as they enter the river system, is a robust, muscular, beautiful, beautiful example of a salmon. All right? And as he starts to work his way upriver, swimming up the waterfalls, dodging bears, doing all the stuff he has to do to get up to this spawning area, and I say he, it's he and she, getting up to the spawning area, he starts to waste away. And at the beginning of this journey, which is a very robust, muscular animal, is now just a bag of skin and bones. They have enough energy to spawn, at which point they roll over and they die. And tens of thousands of hundreds of millions of salmon just sit there and rot and feed the bears. Wow. The white-footed deer mouse. Okay, cute little guy. All right, sounds like he should sound. Got little white feet. All right, he only mates one time in life. All right, finds a partner, and they couple up for the next 24 to 48 hours nonstop. Damn. I know. There are no cigarette breaks, okay? There's no catching up on Netflix. There's no taking a shower. They go for it. At which point, Mr. White-footed deer mouse falls over dead.
Oh, gosh.
Done. All right? Been a heck of a ride. Okay?
What a life.
What a life, right? So when you look at the hearts of these two species, if you look at the heart of the Pacific salmon and if you look at the heart of the white-footed deer mouse, they have the worst cardiovascular disease you can ever imagine. Every one of their arteries is completely plugged. And they went from healthy, robust individuals to nothingness. And it is thought that the adrenaline that is required to allow you to mate for 48 48 hours straight, or to swim upriver to the point where you reach your original hatch place or so that you can spawn. The adrenaline that's required for that is what perpetuates this rapid onset of heart disease. So to answer your question, stress causes the flight or fight response, which causes the flow of adrenaline. So if you are stressed about your financial situation, no different than you might be if you had a child who was ill, no different than you might be if you had a business what was failing, then you run the risk increasing your stress, increasing your adrenaline, and thereby decreasing your health. That's at the beginning of this conversation. Some of the more superficial things people have said, dude, you need to relax. Seriously, okay? All right. Well, it turns out that they're absolutely correct, because while we think of the circulatory system as being this thing that blood flows through and the heart pumpy stuff and, and brings oxygen and glucose to your brain, that's great. But what really occurs is that there's a second circulatory system called your lymphatic system. That's your lymph. And you guys know about lymph nodes. Those are the swelly things when you have a sore throat or something in your armpit under your chin. Those are lymph nodes. And those lymph nodes designed to capture bad things, chew them up, and spit them out. And they are brought, these bad things, by channels called lymphatic channels, which are very low-pressure channels throughout the body. Second whole circulatory system that nobody ever talks about. When you are stressed, one of the first things you do is tighten up, okay? I mean, we're in a situation here in Memphis, and all of a sudden something looks threatening. What do? We
Clench up.
Clench up, buddy. All right? When you clench up, you actually overcome the pressure that is required to move that lymph flow. You block the flow of lymph. What happens when you block the flow of lymph? Your lymph nodes don't get fed the bad bacteria and viruses, and you get sick. So, long answer to your very short but very succinct question is very important that stress causes disease, and of any kind, including finances.
Fascinating.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Sockeyed salmon.
Yeah.
White-footed deer mouse.
If you can say white-footed deer mouse at a party, you're in. Okay.
They both die on the way to have sex. That's all I got to say.
No, after. Well, after.
After,
Yeah.
that's right. They go to town and it's just like, my life is done.
Yeah. There's nothing left to live for. Take me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff.
We've got legal things to get to.
Yeah.
Is it time?
Talk about some legal.
Yeah, I mean, it's time for, I can't remember what we
Courts
called
in
it
session.
early on. Yeah.
Courts in session.
Whatever our legal sessions were. We have covered power of attorney before, but since we have a doctor here, and since I only ever am able to talk about it from the legal perspective, I thought it'd be interesting to get a doctor's perspective on what specifically a healthcare power of attorney, how it works from his end, what he sees when he gets it. When a client comes in, I basically talk to the client about estate planning. If they're coming in and they've never consulted with me before about an estate plan, then y'all both know that I'm going to talk to them about 4 documents.
Yep.
I'm going to talk to them about the last will and testament. I'm going to talk to them about the financial power of attorney, the healthcare power of attorney, and the living will. And I have a spiel that I give. It's pretty much set in stone at this point. I've given it so many times, I think I probably give it in my sleep. I'm going to run down the basic elements of the last will and testament, the power of attorney, the healthcare power of attorney, and the living will. But quite frankly, a lot of times, and I think that this somewhat mentally for me is because I also listed those documents basically in order of how long they are. Our last will and testament is usually somewhere around, unless it's combined with a trust, and we won't get into that, but with the exception of those wills that we do that are combined with a trust, the last will and testament is usually going to be around 15 to 20 pages. Durable power of attorney, financial, legal power of attorney is going to be around, if the will got up to 25, then the financial power of attorney get up to maybe 17, 18, I think. The healthcare power of attorney is only 8 pages long, and the living will is only 3. So they're the documents that people, a lot of times, especially the living will, want to talk about the least. They do not want to talk about considerations that should be given when their death is imminent. They don't like that subject, and they don't like to talk about it. But so they usually either do one of 2 things. They say, oh, I don't need a living will, or yeah, I want it, just whatever, pull the plug on me. I don't want to suffer, and that's the entire conversation we have about the living will. The healthcare power of attorney document, I've already given them a very long spiel about how the financial power of attorney, the durable power of attorney document, it grants somebody a lot of authority over decisions that affect you, because the document effectively puts somebody else in the shoes of the person who is granting agency and allows them to make decisions on behalf of that person, on behalf of the grantor, about everything except for basically medical decisions. I could technically put medical decision-making authority in the document. I have that option. Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee all have laws that specifically relate to the healthcare power of attorney and the granting of the healthcare power of attorney. And they're spoken about, the healthcare power of attorney is spoken about in terms that completely separate from other durable power of attorneys. And the laws that are related to it and the requirements for it are separate as well. So we always do separate documents, at least for here in this state and in the states surrounding us. But at the end of the day, I don't give it much thought beyond, I told you about the financial. The healthcare is basically the same as the financial, except it's about healthcare decisions. And whoever you grant this authority, for the most part, unless you tell me not to, I'm going to grant them specific authority immediately, at least to release the doctor from any requirements for not sharing under HIPAA. I usually will go ahead and say this is effective immediately as to HIPAA. And then I also, to calm any fears that they may have, I say, but as far as anything else is concerned, you're not granting anybody any authority to make decisions for you if you are able to make that decision for yourself and communicate it effectively with the doctor. So as long as you can do those two things, as long as you can make it and you can communicate it, you still have the choice. But if you cannot make a decision for yourself or cannot communicate that decision, then that's when this document really is going to come into play. And they say, okay. And I say, okay, do you want it? And they say, yes. And I print it and boom, change some things around for each person, have them sign it, and they're out the door. And that is the last time that I hear from probably 90% of my clients about their healthcare power of attorney. And the only time I really do hear from them again, if I hear from them at all about that document, is them calling because they're about to go into the hospital or they're about to go into a doctor and they need a copy of it. So I'll send them a copy of it. But I never get any feedback about it. I never get any questions about it after I send them on their way. They just take it to the doctor and say, here you go. Now you have it. So from your perspective, do you like some more than others? Do you prefer to get one? Do you prefer that your name be specifically listed? You know, there's a whole lot that goes into this that I'm making decisions, and I've always wondered what the doctor felt about it.
To begin with, the doctor has little, if no idea, of the difference between a healthcare power of attorney, a living will, an advance directive, or for that matter, a DNR. Mm-hmm. Okay? It all runs together. And had we, speaking for my wife and I, had we not a year ago had to go through this exercise with her mother and her father, I would have even less idea about it. So my experience, and for the first part of my work life as a physician, I was a hospitalist. I was an inpatient doctor. Initially, we worked in the ICU also. We took care of patients who were in the intensive care unit. And so my experience comes from dealing with these patients who would arrive with an advance directive /DNR/HPOA and was limited to something to the effect like a family member saying, he has, or I have the power of attorney. And we would know perhaps just enough to say, oh, is it a healthcare power of attorney? And they would often say, and we would go, well, that's a difference. And they'd have to go back. Meanwhile, this patient might be intubated when they didn't wish to be intubated, and nobody was willing to do anything because we had no idea. So the first problem that we have is from the healthcare side of things is we have very little idea what you're talking about. Okay. And it's tragic, right? I mean, these are really important times in people's lives, and we don't have a lot of knowledge about them. The second part is, my goodness, I mean, the questions about, would I want to be named specifically on that? Well, if you do that, what happens if I'm out of town? What happens if I'm on the road when this occurs? I think you need to, by default, make it more general rather than more specific. I mean, this is a great conversation, and when you guys suggested this, I thought, this is one that we could go for a very long time, and I'm only going to give you one small part of this. I worked with some very smart people at Methodist, and I would guess there is a bell curve of understanding of this, and maybe me being kind of a little less than average smart. I'm sure there's a couple of guys, one of whom was an attorney also, who would probably understand this far better than I. Right. Net result is you're standing in the intensive care unit. There is a question about whether this patient would want to continue to be intubated because they were intubated in the field for something that happened. The answer is, oh, he would never want that. Next question, well, can you tell me who you are? Yes, I'm his partner, or, I'm his brother or sister. Awesome. Is there any other family? Well, no, but I have a power of attorney. What kind of power of attorney? So I guess what I'm telling you is that from your introduction of these 4 documents, we see this as a very cloudy area that is poorly defined once we're at bedside.
Especially when you bring up the language that we use surrounding these documents: advanced directive, healthcare power of attorney, living will, DNR. A lot of times I very rarely refer to an advanced directive, but there are some state laws that do talk about advanced directive instead of healthcare power of attorney, or in addition to healthcare power of attorney. Some people talk about your healthcare, I can't remember the word that they use, but it'll be like your appointee or something like that. Then we'll have specific directive questions that you have to lay out in the document for the client to answer yes or no to. So depending on the document that I produce, I might spend more time going over the document with the client or less, because I may have to go over these questions with them and say, okay, hey, look, this is specifically saying that you authorize them to put a feeding tube in, or you do not want a feeding tube put in. But when it comes down to it, I have found that the easiest way that I can explain these documents is you need a person who can make decisions for you if you cannot make them for yourself. That's the power of attorney document. And there's a separate one for healthcare. And so you need to have a separate one. And if your doctor ever asks you, or if your doctor ever asks whoever you have appointed as your agent, if you have one of these documents, if you have someone who is authorized to make decisions for you, then the answer is yes, and it is this document, the healthcare power of attorney. If under the circumstances we were using advanced directives instead of a healthcare power of attorney because that's the way the law was written in some separate state, then samesies, right? The advanced directive is usually, it involves more of the specific and explicit health choices that you want made, but it also is probably going to have who is appointed as your agent in it. So I kind of think of those 2 documents as interchangeable. And usually when I talk to people about living will, I always compare it to a DNR, because more people have heard of a DNR than they have a living will. And most people, quite frankly, the name living will, I've always thought was mildly confusing.
Yeah.
My will is when I give stuff away after I die.
Yeah.
So what am I doing with my living will? Well, it's actually choices that you're making about dying.
Not live or die, yeah.
Yeah.
It's your not living will.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right, yeah.
Or not want to living will
Not
anymore.
want to live will.
Well, and we interact because I know we're working on something right now where there's a particular family and trying to care for their mother, and how there's one child that's represented as the power of attorney, but then there's other children that are nowhere on any legal document, but they're wanting to get information from the doctors. They're wanting to make decisions. They're kind of causing fusses. And so obviously, you being in that field, then kind of what are things that we can maybe help prepare for those?
As I lay awake last night and stared at the ceiling and thought about doing this today, the real life scenarios, you just gave one right there. And so the surprise brother. And it's typically everything, Court, you've done a great job. I mean, you've got all these documents in place. You have an engaged family, has a level of education, and everybody's on board. And you come to this point in the hospital where a decision needs to be made, and you make the decision consistent with that patient's wishes. And all of a sudden, out of Washington State comes the surprise brother who has had absolutely no contact, with the family nor the individual, but says, no, I know exactly what he would never want you to do that. Who are you? and
You don't even go here.
Yeah. And so I think, and you could speak to the legal side of this, we have always thought that document overrides any objections. However, we've always practiced a little bit of cowboy medicine where it's like, this is what I feel is right, and I'm going to do it and let the chips fall where they may. I cannot speak for other physicians, and particularly other physicians from other cultures who might be much more inclined to stop everything and until this is sorted out. And now you've got the hospital's attorneys involved in this, and now you've got other attorneys, the surprise brothers attorneys, and everybody is fighting over this. Meanwhile, your patient is intubated, which they may or may not have wanted, and we've never really accomplished what you had hoped to accomplish, which is to assign somebody the responsibility and the authority to make medical decisions. And that's probably the biggest one. So the most important thing I would say is let's think about anybody who could possibly come in here and stir things up, and let's bring them into the conversation. Let's let them know that, Dad has chosen me as power of attorney, as healthcare power of attorney. He has some very specific wishes, and, just wanted to let you know that things have progressed maybe since the last time you saw Dad. And then you have to kind of ride it out and see where it goes from there. I think that's the most important part. The idea of DNR, do not resuscitate, which in more modern parlance is allow a natural death, AND. Do not resuscitate implies that, I could save you, but I choose not to. Allowing a natural death is a more peaceful way of describing what should be a very natural and normal process. And so we tried to get away from this idea of saying, I got control over the situation, I just choose not to do it. That's bad.
This conversation takes me way back to high school when there was a real-world scenario in the news. It was Terry Schiavo.
Oh, yeah.
In vegetative state for a very long time. And I can't remember, did she have a healthcare power of attorney?
No, if she had, it would have.
Okay, that's what I was wondering what the issue was. And so we talked about it in ethics, and it was just debating back and forth. What is right? What is wrong? This just made me think of that.
Well, that's the example that I use most often in my client meetings. I bring her up and say, this is the kind of situation you're trying to avoid, is one where your spouse is fighting with your parents. Because a lot of people have questions for me regarding, why do I need this? If my spouse is here, then my spouse will make the decisions for me if I can't. Why do I need a separate document that gives them that authority? And I always bring up that case as a very specific example of a time when the spouse and the parents were at odds with each other over what should be done. And had there been some documentation authorizing one person to make the decisions, then you wouldn't have had that long battle. Because
Cord, what happens in the case of a motor vehicle accident and where the designated healthcare power of attorney is incapacitated also? What happens then?
So that is the biggest single reason that I probably ever recommend that everybody that signs a power of attorney for healthcare points someone as their successor agent. Basically, if blank cannot or chooses not to or for any other reason can't perform the duties that I've described herein, then I want so-and-so to do it. And a lot of times, the biggest problem that I have when I'm drafting something like this for people is they don't have anybody. I don't have anybody that can make these decisions for me. And so I try to get a name from them that we can put who can be in charge. And then I want a second one too. And that'll just send them over. We just spent 30 minutes trying to come up with one. Now I have to come up with another. I'm like, okay. And I don't ever actually say this, but the attitude becomes like, well, then don't get in the car with that person because they need to make your decisions for you if you're only going to have one. Normally what we would do is we would at least designate an appointing authority. Outside of the court system, we would say this group, this law firm, this whatever, this agency, I'm not asking them to serve as my healthcare agent. But if my agent can't serve and I don't have anybody as backup, they're the ones that will appoint the backup. Takes some of the possibility for litigation out of it. But let me follow that up with one of my most burning questions. I probably should know the answer to this, but quite frankly, it's always been kind of murky to me, and I don't know. It may be somewhere in the law. I don't know. I've always just thought it was some policy that hospitals had. If they don't have a document, who can make the decisions? Is there an order of priority? It has to be blood, right? Your spouse. If not blood, then at least it has to be your spouse. Am I wrong on that?
Well, we would default to spouse. That comes under questions of what constitutes a spouse within a particular state, right? So common law marriages and how long have you lived together and could you be married even in a particular state? So all of those things come into play. In the end, the attending physician, and this is an important part of the conversation, but the attending physician of record, in other words, when you are admitted to the hospital, and I hope that you never are, unless it's something fun, but when you're admitted to the hospital, you'll be admitted under somebody. If it's for a medical reason, it tends to be today a hospitalist or an inpatient doctor. If you're surgery, you'll be admitted under the surgeon. And that is your attending physician. And in the end, the attending physician is responsible for all decisions. And, Tennessee is a really interesting state to practice. And it's one of the reasons I served as director for Methodist Hospice for a number of years. And it's long before I became the director of hospice, we clarified and operated under a very interesting Tennessee, I don't know if it's a statute or a regulation or what, but basically it says that no physician may be forced or coerced to provide treatment which in his or her opinion is inappropriate. And they were very deliberate in avoiding the use of futile, because futile brings in questions of spirituality and religiosity. But inappropriate is a decision that I, as the attending physician, can make. Now, where that's used is this, and this is what I used to teach. There's been a horrible MVA, a motor vehicle accident, in front of Methodist Hospital, and they start bringing in, it's a mass casualty event, they start bringing in victims, one of whom is decapitated, and a family member is running inside and says, do everything, you've got to save them. At this point, would I go ahead and start to do chest compressions on this individual? And why or why not? Am I obligated by law to go ahead and do chest compressions on this individual? Is decapitated. There's no longer a head.
Yeah, they're dead.
Okay, so you feel comfortable making that decision that this individual is dead, and there is nothing within our scientific knowledge or norms that is going to resuscitate this individual. Are we all in agreement with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
feel
use
like
decapitation for a
Yeah.
reason.
You'd
Yeah.
be giving the family a false sense of hope, right?
Yeah. If it was a leg off, it's a different.
Okay, maybe. All aside, we have agreed that this individual cannot be resuscitated, that there is no benefit. So we're standing at the bedside, and let's say that we have somebody with an advanced cancer, and they have gone through chemotherapy, we have replaced fluids, replaced electrolytes, we've maybe transplanted something, and their heart stops. Now, their heart is not in a fatal arrhythmia, okay? Their heart is stopped. It's what you would call flatlined, right? The family is standing next to me screaming, do something, you have to resuscitate this patient. And what if, in my opinion, there is nothing that can be done to resuscitate this patient? I went to school for a really long time, all right? And I've been doing this for a while, and in my opinion, this individual has reached the end of their life. And anything I do to them is not only painful, I'm going to break some ribs, I'm going to shove a tube down their throat, I'm going to cut down some veins, I'm going to do all sorts of awful things, but it's not going to change anything. This patient has reached the end of their life, in my opinion. So the Tennessee law, statute, regulation clearly gives me the authority to make the final decision. And again, a long answer to your short question, who in the end has to make this decision? And it's me. Now, I may actually be faulted for making that decision. Interestingly enough, at least when I was teaching medicine just a few years ago, there has never been a case successfully brought in the state of Tennessee for refusing to attempt to resuscitate a patient. Because we don't take this lightly. All right? If there's a chance, we're probably going to go for it, unless there is a deliberate instruction not to do so. But for the most part, the law is pretty generous in giving me, as the attending physician, the final authority in making that decision. And it can't be any other way. We can make this several other podcasts. It cannot be any other way other than to place the burden of responsibility and authority onto me, because I'm the guy that's responsible for this patient. Is that a very long answer? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, that's great. And that's where I think a lot of it is where it comes to when there may be options of treatments and different measures that you can take where that power of attorney person could then be consulted. But you're correct. It's you ultimately go to a medical professional that you trust to make the right decision. And they're going to know, because of all their years of school and all their experience, what's going to be ultimately best.
And I think that what you just said, a medical professional that you trust, which implies that you know them, which is the problem with our healthcare system today, is who do we have? After spending 3.5 to 7 minutes of FaceTime with that individual, every 4 months, is that really somebody that you know to make, it would even be willing to make decisions on your behalf?
Yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap and a great setup for maybe a part 2 down the road.
Yeah,
because this is
absolutely.
fascinating. But before we wrap, I do have I guess, a thought or a question to run by you. On the Today Show a few weeks ago, speaking about, is it GLPs? Yeah. Speaking of GLPs, they said Ozempic may show that it can prevent Alzheimer's. Have you heard that? Is there any truth to that?
Whoa, no, don't ask me that. Don't ask me that. So all of these groups, and these are glycoprotein-like peptides, GLP, glycoprotein-like peptides. All of this group of drugs, semaglutide, tirzepatide, there's a couple of other tides floating around out there. All of them have some fascinating implications, one of which is that, again, they cross the blood-brain barrier and therefore can affect behavior. But it's so far, and remember, there's a dozen years of practice in Europe before they were introduced here in the United States. So we've got a lot of data on this stuff. But one of the things is in binge behavior, binge drinking and binge eating behavior. It actually has been shown to decrease binge eating and binge drinking. There's nothing else like that out there. And it works in the very same way. It decreases that satiety or that impulsive behavior that makes us eat, that makes us gain weight. In this particular case, binge eating makes us purge afterwards. So we've had a lot of success going outside of the box on some of these drugs. In terms of Alzheimer's, in that we really don't even know what causes Alzheimer's and why these plaques develop, I'd be really hesitant to say the GLP-1s, certainly are pointing towards that. But I'm also going to tell you that there's a lot implied in, we talked about how do you live longer? Calorie deprivation. Well, calorie deprivation may just be not eating the stuff that's bad for you. Mm-hmm. So if you look at ultra-processed foods, if you look at chemicals that we ingest and the hormones that we ingest on a daily basis, maybe if we ingest less of those through the GLP-1s, maybe we have less likelihood to develop these plaques. A thought. Yes, it's possible, but I got nothing for you.
I thought because it wasn't like National Enquirer. I read this and it was like on the Today Show, and I'm like, okay, they must know something,
Well,
they were careful to say this that it does not prevent, Alzheimer's.
Well, and it's been known from time to time because I worked at a Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation before here, and I remember on the research stuff there'd be cancer drugs that would come out that would then have benefits for type 1 diabetes, and so for forever there's been drugs that have come out for one purpose, but then have been able to help in other different situations. And so that's where it's, the drug may say, Benadryl is for allergies, but it also could be used for insomnia. Like there's so many different things that you can do. So it makes sense that because Ozempic and things like that are so popular, they're looking at what are the other benefits it could bring.
Oh, it's huge.
But I think that's, again, to your point of having a relationship, because I remember I had a minor med situation a couple years ago, and I said, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. I'm all red and splotchy. And the person was like, well, I don't know if that's your normal red or not. And I'm like, well, I'm telling you, it's not my normal red. I'm not this red normally. Obviously, if I had a relationship with somebody, they were like, Katie, you look a little red. What's going on? This is not your normal look. And so I think that is something that we do need to try and find more individuals like you who are really building a relationship, because part of what our podcast is we tell people all day long, you need a relationship with a financial person, a legal person, an accountant. You need a health person.
And there's actually an evolution right now, a whole separate business model for ombudsmen or advocates for patients who are, court, to your point, are specially trained to develop a relationship with somebody. They aren't physicians, but they may have a background in social work. They may have a background in psychology. They may have an English degree, but they are involved enough with the patient and have enough working knowledge of that patient's life that they can step in and advocate for them in situations. And there's businesses that are popping up around there. It's just a workaround for a healthcare system that doesn't have a lot of answers.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, hearing about ZüpMed, hearing all of your insights.
And you pronounced it correctly. I am just so proud of you.
Zip like book, so everyone go check it out.
Is there any other final thoughts you want to have?
No, it's just been such a pleasure. Again, as I said at the beginning, I have such a huge respect for what you guys do. And these podcasts are not just entertaining. They're really important, what you're doing. And thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Y'all come pet the dog.
Yeah, definitely.
We'd love to. Field trip.
Yeah.
Field trip.
No, very fascinated with what you're doing. Thank you so much for spending time and sharing with us. And we look forward to doing another episode.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. I'd love to come back.
So there's the closing bell. Ladies and gentlemen, you've made it to the end of yet another episode of the BullCast podcast. If you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please feel free to go to your favorite subscription service and sign up to have our podcast beamed directly to your device every single Thursday at noon. If you'd like to find out more about Court, Katie, Cameron, or Nicole, please feel free to go to our website. That website is bullcastpodcast.com. We've got bios up there, we've got some pictures, and we've got a place where you can drop a comment or suggest a topic you'd like to hear us talk more about. But hey, I mentioned pictures. If you like pictures, we've got an Instagram handle. That Instagram handle is at BullCast Podcast, and we also have an X handle, which is at BullCast Podcast as well. And we have a Facebook page. Check us out on Facebook at BullCast the Podcast. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, as we are wont to do, we do mention occasionally that we work at a place called Pickler Wealth Advisors. And if you'd like to find out even more information about any of us, find out about what we do, find out about what we can do for you, find out about our amazing team, and find out about our boss, David Pickler, please feel free to go to that website. That website is picklerwealthadvisors.com.
That's advisors with an O.
Not an E.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've given you everything you need to go forth and get healthy. So for now, I'm Court.
I'm Katie.
I'm Cam.
And we're done.